So during the winter months, the number one bait for me and all the sort of fishing what I'm doing is maggots. They catch all sorts of fish, F1s and silverfish, and they're probably the most reliable bait. In this video, I'm just going to run through the rigs that I use for maggot fishing in the winter and exactly how I tie them and all the little components and stuff that you need to create a perfect maggot rig. So starting with the floats that I use for maggots are the Richie Wilson Maggie floats, and during the winter time for F1s I normally use like a 1.5mm hollow bristle. It just works nicely for, you know, when you're fishing long pole and the light's a little bit difficult. It's just about the right thickness where it's sensitive enough to see them shy indications but nice and thick so you can still see the bristle, so that's very important. So starting off with the line diameter, I've put already a spool of 015 Guru N gauge onto the rig mate. That's again just a nice durable main line for winter, not too thick that it's going to affect presentation, but also not too thin that you're going to have problems with the main line letting you down or tangles or stuff like that. So I'm going to thread my line through the float, and then you need to put 3 pieces of silicone on. Now the silicone is very important, what I choose to use, especially with maggot fishing and when using carbon stem floats. Because what you often find is with carbon stem floats is when you lay your rig in, it sometimes holds on the surface tension. And if you use too thick a silicone, it actually aids sort of the float not wanting to set through the surface tension. So using a nice thin and a nice fine silicone is very important on your carbon stem float. So I personally use this 0.3 micro silicone, which I think is actually designed for hooks, for, you know, tying hair rigs and stuff, but it also works brilliantly on your pole floats. So I think this is a real good choice for that. It just helps cut through that surface tension and lets your rig fish a lot better. But don't be put off by, say, it's quite thin. It is also very strong. So I think that's a really important point with your maggot floats. So I'm just going to cut three lots of that. 2 shorter ones. And one probably sort of 5mm and one maybe sort of 10mm. And I'm just going to thread them onto the line. Make sure I've got a nice clean end to the line. Just going to cut it with my scissors. And I'm going to put, like I say, the 2 smaller pieces on first. And one longer piece. Now, again, it's important to have that longer piece of silicone at the bottom of the float. Just helps it stopping tangles. So I'm going to put my first 2 pieces of silicone onto the float. And I normally place the first piece of silicone sort of 10 to 15mm below the float body, just like that. Second one goes sort of halfway down the float. And then, like I say, the bottom one I'm just going to leave to overlap by a few mil at the bottom. Just like that. So there's the floats nicely secured on the line. So the nice thing about this RigMate Pro is what it allows me to do is get me rigs so that they're the same every single time. So there's nothing worse, I don't think, than when you're fishing with a rig and you tangle it or anything like that, or you break your main line, you get snagged, you lose your, and you put a new rig on, and it's not quite the same as your original rig, and you just need everything to try and be as accurate as possible, and that's the way I like to do it in my fishing. So that's why I actually use this RigMate Pro. And all I'm going to do to attach it onto the pin at the other end, you need to obviously tie the loop in the bottom of your rig. And one thing that I wouldn't be without in my fishing, especially when I'm tying rigs at home, is a loop tire. I personally use the Sensus one. This is the biggest out of the 2, and it just creates the same sort of even loop every time. And I also think it actually creates a bit of a stronger and a better knot than when I actually try and tie it by hand. It's something I wouldn't be without. So I'm just going to tie that loop 2 turns with the loop tire, and it just creates, like I say, that same loop every time. So let's get my pair of scissors, trim my tag end, and I'll just attach it to the pin at the bottom of the RigMate Pro, tighten the line up, and I've already marked out my shotting pattern. I've actually got one of the rig strips on the RigMate Pro, which basically you can mark your different shotting patterns out, And on this particular one for fishing with maggots, I've marked out my bulk and 2 droppers shotting pattern, which I think is a really good shotting pattern when you're fishing with maggots. It gets it down fairly quick when you're wanting to fish on the bottom in the initial sort of drop of your rig. It's not too negative where everything's taking a long time to catch up, but then you've got 2 nice little light droppers in that bottom part of your rig just to bring that bait in a little bit slower at the end and just show that bait to the fish. Just a nice all-round rig for fishing on the bottom, I think, bulk and 2 droppers. So just going to slide my float up. And what I normally do is I just mark on the line with a permanent marker. I've just got a black Sharpie marker, and I just mark on line with me marks there where I'm going to put my shot, just in line with the mark. So basically now the actual shotting pattern's now also marked out on my line with the marker, and then it just makes it nice and easy then for me just to put my shot over the top of where them marks are, and I know they're bang on in the right position. So in terms of the shot for this float, I'm actually choosing to use a 4x12 today. That's probably my all-round float in the winter. You can use it sort of from 3 foot all the way up to 5, even 5.5, 6 foot when it's nice conditions. It's just a nice light rig, and I just found that 4x12 takes about the right amount of shot. And they take 7 number 10 shot. So just got some Balabini lead shot. Like I say, I like the round lead shot as opposed to sort of cube weights or stocks for this sort of thing, because I'm going to set my shotting pattern, I'm not going to move it, so I want them to stay in place nicely, and that's why I choose to use the round shot for a maggot rig in the winter. So I've got my number 10s in my little shot tubes on my rig mate. So I'm going to put the first shot onto my rig. So what you need to do, and what I find easiest, is just take the pin off the rig mate just to get that first dropper on, and I can use the pin to hold it tight, and I'm just going to put my first number 10 dropper right above the loop there. So that's now set in place. And then my 2 dropper shot, I'm going to have my first dropper is obviously above my hook length, and then my second dropper is at 16 centimeters. So I'm going to put that on again. Again, it's another number 10. And I just find number 10s are about right for a shotting pattern when you're fishing like on the bottom for like maggots. You can use smaller droppers, but I just find they don't show up your bites as well, and obviously your bites are very shy in the winter, and I think you do need to have a fine balance between having your shot small enough for a nice slow fall, but a shot big enough to register a positive bite, and I just find a number 10's a good happy medium for that. So I'm going to put my bulk on, and it's going to be 5 number 10's, and all I do is I just try and line me shot up as best as possible just to create a nice neat bulk. So get the slit in the shot, line it up. I'm just going to put my last few shot on. That just creates a nice neat bulk, and I think that helps with presentation and stops tangles if everything's nice and neat. So I'm just using a pair of shot pliers. These are the Reeve ones. There's a few different good shotting pliers out. I have used the Cresta ones in the past as well, and they're very good, but important that you have some pliers to put the shot on, so you're not using your teeth. So now that is the main bulk of my shot on the rig. I've got my bulk, my 2 droppers, everything's measured up, everything's nice and accurate. But what you tend to find, and what I always tend to like to build into my rig, is a couple of fine-tuning shots just to dot your float down, but also so that you can alter the way that your float sits through the day. Now, a number 10 shot's quite difficult to take off the line once you've added it on, whereas having some little trimming shots, some little micro cubes, you can easily adjust your rig. So what I've got in this little tub here, I've got some number 13 micro cubes. They're just the Guru micro cubes. Them or the Preston stocks. There's a lot of different variations. They're all very much the same. Them 13s, you can just put, I think on a 4x12 it normally takes 1 or 2 number 13 micro cubes just to dot it down. So I just add them on at home, and then if needs be, they're nice and easy just to take off on the bank if it is dotted down a little bit too low. But I'd rather do that at home than have to try and put a number 13 on the bank when your hands might be cold in the winter. So 2 number 13 micro cubes. And that is pretty much the finished rig finished shotting pattern. I've got it dotted down nice and low, so there's only a few mil float showing. And like I said, I can always alter it on the bank. So I'm going to wrap it onto my winder. Now I use the Reeve stacking system. And on these orange winders, it takes normally for a 4x12 float, I'd normally make it to like a match kit length. And it's normally 14 lengths of the winder. So that's 1, 2, and so on to wrap it around the winder. So 14 of them would be the same length as my Daiwa match kits. 6, 13, 14. And all I do is I just measure the loop up to the end of the winder, tie a larger loop just to make it easy for me to get the rig on and off the winder, and then just attach it on the end. Just make sure my float's nicely in the centre of the winder like that, and that's the finished maggot rig. And now the only other thing what people might be asking now is sort of what hook length diameters I'm going to use, what hooks I'm going to use, length for hook length, stuff like that I'm going to add to that rig. Now I never put my hook lengths on when I'm at home. I always just like to choose a hook on the bank. But to give a general rundown of this, in winter, normally you're fishing for like silverfish, F1s, an odd carp with this. And normally 0.11 N-gauge, got some 0.11 N-gauge here, is normally my go-to hook length. It's light enough to get bites off silverfish, but it's also strong enough to land an odd bonus carp. I'm not a big fan of scaling down too light and going down to like 0.9, 0.8. I like to have a line that, you know, ensures I can land anything I'm likely to hook, and I think 0.11 N-gauge is perfect when balanced with elastics like, you know, pink hydro, blue hydro, stuff like that, which is the sort of elastics I normally use during the winter. Hook-wise, normally the F1 Maggot hooks are really good for that. So Guru F1 Maggot hook, size 18, size 20 for single or double maggot. Or if you are catching a few bigger carp, the F1 pellet hooks in an 18 are also a really good hook for fishing for F1s, carp and silverfish with maggots in the winter.